America's largest Muslim civil rights group, the Council on American Islamic Relations, known as CAIR, is condemning Colombia for caving to what they call the Trump administration's Israel First agenda. Edward Ahmad Mitchell is the National Deputy Director of CAIR, who says they are also leading the fight to free detained activist Mahmoud Khalil. You say that these protests, these demonstrations, are just organic protest coming out of consciousness by students. Fair statement?
First thing I want to note is that we are not representing Mahmoud Khalil in his immigration case. We represent him in a separate case involving Columbia University, which I'm happy to discuss as we get further into the program. In terms of the protests themselves, absolutely. As we all know, the October 7th attack happened back in 2023. And in response, the Israeli government said they were going to punish everyone in Gaza. They were going to cut off all food, fuel, water, electricity because they were fighting, quote, human animals. That's what the Israeli defense minister said. And then they carried out that threat. And young people in America, because of social media, were able to every day see footage of young Palestinian kids and mothers being blown to pieces. And those protests were organic. They were led by the students. And these students decided to engage in peaceful protests and peaceful acts of civil disobedience, modeled after the protests that students did against the Vietnam War, against apartheid South Africa, against segregation. And that spread across the entire country. And Dr. Phil, these protests were very diverse. Most of them were led by a combination of Jewish, Palestinian, and Black students and others. At Columbia, for example, they had Passover events every Friday night at the Columbia encampment. So these were diverse protests, and the demand was very simple. Stop the genocide in Gaza, stop the war crimes against Palestinians, and disentangle any university financing from the Israeli government. Now, Dr. Phil, were there some protesters who said crazy things? Yes. Were there some incidents of vandalism? Yes. No question about that. But ACLED, which is an organization that studies conflict and monitors around the world, said 97% of the protests that occurred were peaceful. And that's a really important fact. We always hone in on the vandalism that occurs and the behavior that's bad that occurs. The overwhelming majority of these protests were peaceful and were diverse and were focused on stopping the genocide in Gaza.
We've studied and followed the money, and I think a lot of them have been brought about by outside influences. So I suppose it's somewhere in between. They're not just all organic. That's just simply not the truth.
So, Dr. Phil, look, I'm a lawyer. I'm a former criminal prosecutor. I deal in facts, not suppositions. So just a few facts to address. Number one, the protests were organic. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that these protests were funded by nefarious actors or foreign organizations that some have alleged. And if any of them were funded, then people should put up or shut up. Show the evidence. Where'd the money come from? Who gave the money? No one has done that. It's just supposition. And this happens, Dr. Phil, every time there's a protest movement, right? Whenever kids protested Vietnam, they were called pro-communist, anti-American. When Black people violated the law by protesting segregation, you're being influenced by communists. You hate America. You want to destroy the American way of life. And same thing when protests against South African apartheid occurred. Dr. Phil, what we've got to do is address the substance of the issues, right? Address what the protesters are actually saying, not assume the worst about their intentions or assume they must be nefarious actors. Again, we have to deal in facts. Second thing I'll say briefly, Dr. Phil, in terms of genocide is a huge word. It's a huge allegation. I don't make it lightly. I'll give you just a few facts to support my contention that a genocide is occurring in Gaza. First and foremost, the International Court of Justice, which is the premier institution that addresses human rights violations around the world, has said that the allegations leveled against the Israeli government do meet the definition of genocide. Now, that case is still unfolding and going on, but they have acknowledged that. Numerous human rights groups have said that what's happening at the very least is ethnic cleansing. That includes Israeli human rights groups, not just Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, but Israeli human rights groups. But beyond that, Dr. Phil, I just want you to consider what Israeli leaders have themselves said. After October 7th, the Israeli defense minister said on TV, we are cutting off all food, all fuel, all water, all electricity to everyone in Gaza because we are fighting, and he said, quote, human animals. That was a description of the Palestinian people. And he went on to do that. They blockaded everything. Nothing got into the Palestinian people. And on top of that, the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, told Israeli soldiers, as you're going into Gaza, think about what Amalek did to you. Now, Dr. Phil, you're a Christian, I'm a Muslim, but we're both familiar with the Bible. There's a story in the Bible about the kingdom of Amalek attacking the Israelis, the children of Israel, and God then telling the Israelis, supposedly, to go into Amalek and kill every man, woman, child, infant, and ox in response. And the Prime Minister of Israel quoted this story to Israeli soldiers. And then those soldiers went and carried out what he said, Dr. Phil. You can look at the footage. The Israeli government has not been shooting at Hamas fighters and accidentally killing civilians. They have blown up empty mosques. They have blown up hospitals. They've blown up refugee camps with nothing but civilians there.
Edward, you made a very eloquent speech about whether or not this was genocidal and cited some authority that it's been labeled as genocidal. And you're quite right. There has been control of some of what has gone into Gaza or not in terms of food and water. There have been things said about going after an enemy and that is hiding among the populace. And you are right. They have controlled the sea because they've been trying to bring weapons in by sea. There has been control of some of the supplies that have gone in there because they've been stolen by Hamas and not gotten to the Palestinian people. There have been bombs that have killed many Palestinians, including Palestinian women and children, and that happens in war. It particularly happens when the invaders go back and hide among the civilian populace. And if you deal with facts, you can't deny that that's taking place. You know, sometimes a non-credible denial is worse than an admission. Do you deny that that takes place?
A few things I would say, Dr. Phil. Number one, Gaza absolutely is densely packed. There absolutely are Hamas militants and other Palestinian militants who are all over Gaza. But the facts are this, that most of those individuals are hiding in tunnels under the ground, safe from Israeli bombing above ground. Number two, the Israeli government is, again, deliberately, intentionally targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. They're not accidentally killing civilians while trying to kill Hamas militants. And the proof of that is their attacks on hospitals, on refugee camps, on mosques, on even churches in the middle of service where there was no fighting happening at the time. And again, the Israeli military has openly admitted what they're doing. Early on in the conflict, Dr. Phil, an Israeli military spokesman said, we're no longer going to fire warning shots at apartment buildings before we blow them up. As you may know, in years past, the Israelis would fire sometimes a warning shot at the roof of a building to give civilians and others time to get out of the building. They said, we're not going to do that anymore. They didn't give us warning on October 7th. We're not going to give them any warning before we blow up their building. So the Israeli government has openly admitted they are deliberately killing civilians by cutting off all food and water, including the stuff that was going through inspection. So not like there was any risk there were weapons in these food deliveries. They were just deliberately cutting off food to squeeze the population. And by the way, they were blockading and limiting food well before October 7th. Palestinian kids would die of disease and starvation well before October 7th because of the blockade. So, Dr. Phil, what you're saying isn't completely false. There is some truth in what you're saying, but I tell you there's also truth in what I'm saying. If we can just have a bit of an open mind here, I think you're going to have to acknowledge the Israeli government, yes, was attacked. Israel was attacked on October 7th. There were attacks on civilians. No question about that. But it is also true the Israeli government is attacking civilians in Gaza en masse in a genocidal way. Two things can be true at the same time. Number one, Mahmoud Khalil has not been charged with any crime whatsoever. And he has not been accused of handing out Hamas propaganda. He's not been accused of even expressing support for Hamas. If he provided material support for Hamas, that would be a crime. You wouldn't have to deport him. You could charge him with the crime, put him in jail, and send him away for the rest of his life. And so if they've got the goods on him, prosecute him. But they're not doing that because there's no evidence that he has done that. He has not done that. Point number two. You had a guest earlier who said that the Jewish kids who have been protesting the genocide in Gaza are Jewish in name only. That's incredibly insulting. It's anti-Semitic to deny someone's Jewish identity because you disagree with their view of what's happening in Palestine and Israel. It's just ridiculous. And I just want to condemn that in the strongest terms and express my solidarity with Jewish people all around the world who have the right to determine their own identity. And the last thing I would say is this about Islam. I'm a Muslim, Dr. Phil, so I got to correct the record here. Your last guest said that Muslims have been attacking Jews for millennia. The Quran teaches that Muslims have to respect and protect Christians and Jews. We all believe in the same God, the God of Abraham. And as you may know, Jerusalem was under the control of the Byzantines when the Muslims surrounded Jerusalem. And when the Muslims took over Jerusalem, there were no Jews in the city because the Byzantines had banned Jews. It was the Muslims who insisted Jews must be allowed to come back to Jerusalem and worship. And for centuries, Muslims protected the right of Jewish people to live alongside Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land and across the Muslim world. Some of the greatest Jewish scholars flourished in the Muslim world while Jews were facing persecution in Europe. So I just wanted to note that it's completely incorrect, and anyone can read the Quran to see what it actually says about protecting the rights of religious minorities, especially Jews and Christians.